There is a moment in every war when the most powerful side in the conflict discovers something that no weapon can prevent and no press briefing can hide. It discovers its own limits. It discovers that dominance and control are not the same thing, that the ability to destroy is not the same as the ability to win, that you can fill the skies with the most sophisticated aircraft ever built by human hands and still find yourself in a war that refuses to end on your terms. America is living that moment right now, and Iran, battered, bombed, blockaded, and stripped of its supreme leader, is living it too. Two countries, one war, and a lesson that neither side wanted to learn, written in burning wreckage and dying soldiers, and a strait that one side controls and the other cannot force open. Tonight, we tell that story. The story of the F-35 and the F-16 and the shoulder-fired missile in the mountains of Isfahan. The story of the most expensive air force in human history facing an adversary that has spent 40 years preparing for exactly this fight. The story of what happens when the world's greatest military power meets an enemy that does not need to win the air war. It only needs to survive it. This is the story of the 2026 Iran war, and it is still being written. To understand where we are today, we need to understand where we began. On the night of February 28, 2026, President Donald Trump gave the order, Operation Epic Fury. At 6:35 in the morning, CENTCOM announced that it and partner forces had begun airstrikes against Iran. U.S. warships launched Tomahawk cruise missiles, HIMARS rocket systems fired from undisclosed positions, B-2 stealth bombers, the most expensive aircraft ever built, flew from their bases to strike hardened ballistic missile facilities deep inside Iranian territory. B-1 Lancers and B-52 Stratofortresses joined the assault. And at 6:45, the Israeli Air Force began an unprecedented wave of decapitation strikes. In the opening hours of the war, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and several high officials were killed as they attended meetings at his residential compound. Members of his family were also killed. The man who had led the Islamic Republic for over 3 decades, who had shaped Iranian foreign policy, who had built the network of proxy forces and missiles and nuclear ambitions that America and Israel had spent years trying to contain, was dead before breakfast. Global Defense Corps. Rasian Times. Washington celebrated. Trump took to social media. Supporters called it a historic moment. And then, Iran fired back. And it did not stop firing for weeks. Iran launched strikes against Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the largest American airbase in the Middle East. It targeted Aramco's Ras Tanura oil refining facility in Saudi Arabia, one of the most critical pieces of energy infrastructure on the planet. It struck Gulf countries with missiles and drones simultaneously: Bahrain, Kuwait, the UAE, Iraq, Jordan, in coordinated waves designed not to achieve a single decisive blow, but to exhaust, to overwhelm, and to demonstrate that Iran's reach extended everywhere American forces had planted their flag. Bahrain reported attacks on fuel tanks. 2 people were injured when a hostile drone struck a residential building in Kuwait. The Kuwaiti authorities reported that defense equipment and the country's main international airport were attacked, and 6 power lines went out of service. Explosions were heard in downtown Dubai. The Gulf, which had spent years presenting itself to the world as a zone of stability and modern prosperity, was burning in places that its citizens had never imagined could burn. Defense blog. Defense blog. And in the skies over Iran itself, something was happening that no American military official wanted to say out loud. The F-35, the crown jewel of American air power, the most advanced stealth fighter ever built, the aircraft that was supposed to render Iranian air defenses irrelevant, was not invulnerable. On March 19, 2026, a U.S. F-35 was damaged by what American officials described as likely Iranian ground fire during a combat mission over Iran. The aircraft made an emergency landing at an American base in the Middle East. The pilot was reported to be in stable condition, but suffering shrapnel wounds. CENTCOM confirmed the emergency landing and claimed the aircraft landed safely. An NPR correspondent reported the aircraft had made a hard landing and would be out of service for a long period. It was the F-35's first combat-related emergency landing. If confirmed, it was the first Iranian interception of a U.S. aircraft. Iranian officials celebrated openly. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps said it had seriously damaged the F-35 over central Iran. Iran's Tasnim news agency released video purporting to show the interception, possibly by an infrared search and track system, a technology that does not rely on radar, that cannot be jammed by electronic warfare, and that can detect the heat signature of an aircraft regardless of how stealthy its airframe may be. Norsk Luftvern. Norsk Luftvern. Think about what that means. The F-35 was designed at enormous cost to be invisible to radar. Its entire strategic value rests on the assumption that enemy air defenses cannot find it. Iran found it. Not with sophisticated Russian-supplied radar, not with advanced Chinese tracking systems, with an infrared sensor, technology that has existed for decades, that Iran has had time to develop and refine and position, because Iran has spent 40 years knowing that one day American aircraft would come. The losses mounted. U.S. officials confirmed to Bloomberg that a total of 12 General Atomics MQ-9 Reaper drones were lost in the war. 9 shot down by Iran, 1 destroyed on the ground in Jordan by an Iranian missile, and 2 crashed. These are not cheap losses. Each MQ-9 Reaper costs approximately $32 million. The drones that Iran shot down and filmed and posted on social media were not just weapons. They were propaganda victories, proof to every watching government and every watching military in the world that American unmanned systems are not untouchable. That the technological dominance Washington has taken for granted for 30 years has limits, real limits, documented limits, filmed and uploaded to the internet for the world to study. Norsk Luftvern. And then came the most dramatic episode of the entire war, an episode that reads less like a modern military operation and more like something from a different era entirely. On April 3, 2026, an American F-15E Strike Eagle of the 494th Fighter Squadron was shot down over Iran by Iranian forces. Both crew members ejected. The pilot was recovered relatively quickly. The weapons systems officer, the second crew member, was not. And what followed was described by a U.S. military official as one of the most challenging and complex rescue missions in the entire history of American special operations. The CIA used a special technology to locate the airmen and employed what it called an unconventional assisted recovery process, contacting civilians willing to assist American military forces. The United States used an abandoned agricultural airstrip in southern Isfahan province as a temporary forward operating base, operated and protected by operators from Delta Force. The rescue involved hundreds of U.S. troops and 155 aircraft. 155 aircraft for a rescue mission to recover a single man from the mountains of Iran. Defense News. Defense News. During the rescue, 2 UH-60 Black Hawk helicopters were hit and damaged. 2 MC-130J Hercules transport aircraft became stuck on the improvised airstrip and were deliberately destroyed by American forces to prevent them from falling into Iranian hands. 4 Special Operations helicopters from the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment were destroyed. Iran celebrated all of it. Iranian officials posted the wreckage on social media. They named the Iranian officer, Brigadier General Masoud Zar, commander of the Iranian Army Air Defense College, who was killed by an American airstrike after his unit hit one of the rescue aircraft with a shoulder-fired missile. A shoulder-fired missile. A man-portable, relatively cheap, decades-old technology had forced one of the most expensive and complex rescue operations in American military history. And an NBC News correspondent noted what that moment represented. Despite the U.S. effort to neutralize the conventional military capabilities of Iran, the threat of asymmetric warfare endured. Defense News +2. This is the central truth of the 2026 Iran war, and it is the truth that every government on Earth is absorbing right now. America destroyed Iran's conventional military in the opening days of the conflict. It killed the supreme leader. It struck the nuclear facilities. It degraded the Air Force. Operation Epic Fury sank Iran's largest naval ships, degraded its air defenses, and killed many of its top leaders. By every traditional measure of military victory, America won the air war. And yet, Iran still fired. Iran still launched drones into Dubai. Iran still hit American bases. Iran still closed the Strait of Hormuz. Iran still sent its missiles toward Gulf oil infrastructure. Iran still put a shoulder-fired missile through an American helicopter in the Zagros Mountains. Because Iran was never trying to win the air war. It was trying to survive it. And surviving, continuing to exist, continuing to function, continuing to inflict cost, is its own form of victory. Against a superpower that came to destroy you and failed to silence you, survival is the statement. Survival is the message. Survival is what Iran means when it says, "We control what matters." Global Defense Corps. What does Iran control? It controls the Strait of Hormuz. For weeks during the conflict, the Iranian military effectively controlled the critical strait, blocking much of the traffic through the 21-mile-wide passage and disrupting the global economy. 21 miles. That is the width of the choke point through which approximately 20% of the world's traded oil passes. 21 miles that Iran mined, patrolled, threatened, and closed. Not with an air force, not with stealth fighters, not with carrier strike groups, but with naval mines, fast attack boats, and the credible willingness to use them. Trump threatened to destroy Iran's infrastructure and its civilization if Iran did not make a deal and reopen the strait. Iran did not reopen it on America's terms. A ceasefire was brokered by Pakistan beginning on April 8th. Iran announced that commercial shipping would be allowed through the Hormuz Strait during the ceasefire, but reimposed restrictions when the U.S. refused to lift its naval blockade. After the failure of the Islamabad talks, Trump said he no longer cared about negotiations and announced a full naval blockade of Iran from April 13th. A naval blockade of a country that America had spent 6 weeks bombing. The war that was supposed to end Iran's ability to threaten the region had produced a situation where the United States Navy was attempting to strangle a country that refused to be strangled. Norsk Luftvern +2. Iran also controls the narrative inside its own borders, or at least, it controls what the world can see of it. Iran renewed a near-total internet blackout as the war intensified, with NetBlocks reporting internet activity dropping to 4% of ordinary levels. Iranians abroad reported they were unable to reach family inside Iran. Schools closed. The government ordered the evacuation of Tehran. The human cost of the war, what it looked like from inside Iranian cities, what the people living through it experienced, remained largely invisible to the outside world. The images that did emerge were selected and shaped by Iranian state media. The bodies and the rubble and the fear were invisible behind a digital wall that Tehran constructed with the same deliberateness it brought to its missile doctrine. Eurasian Times. And Iran controls, above all, the question of what comes next. Because the war did not end Iran. It wounded it badly. It killed its supreme leader. It struck its nuclear program. It degraded its military. But it did not produce a government willing to capitulate, a population willing to surrender, or a strategic situation that America can declare resolved. On March 29th, Iranian Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf rejected negotiations with the United States outright. He also declared that entities holding U.S. bonds were legitimate targets, a statement that extended Iran's conception of the battlefield into the global financial system itself. Iran's parliament was not negotiating. It was escalating rhetorically, ideologically, expansively, suggesting that even if American bombs had destroyed its military infrastructure, they had not broken its political will. Eurasian Times. A Reuters poll conducted in mid-March found that 65% of Americans believed Trump would order a large-scale ground war in Iran. Only 7% supported such a move. The gap between what the American public feared its government would do and what it wanted its government to do had never been wider on a foreign policy question. And that gap matters because it defines the limits of American escalation just as surely as Iran's shoulder-fired missiles define the limits of American air supremacy. Iran's strategists understand this. They have always understood it. The United States can destroy, but it cannot occupy. It can degrade, but it cannot replace. It can blockade, but it cannot govern. And in the distance between destruction and governance, in that vast, ungovernable space, Iran lives. Eurasian Times. The F-35 that limped back to base on March 19th carrying shrapnel from Iranian ground fire will eventually be repaired or retired. The lesson it carries, about the limits of stealth, about the resilience of adversaries who have prepared for decades, about the gap between technological superiority and strategic control, will not be so easily fixed. America sent the F-35, then the F-16, then Delta Force into a mountain valley in Isfahan, then the Navy to blockade a strait it cannot fully close. At each step, Iran absorbed the blow, regrouped, and sent back a message. The message was always the same. You can strike us, you can wound us, you can kill our leaders, but you cannot end us, and we control what matters. Tonight, the Strait of Hormuz remains contested. American forces remain on high alert across the Middle East. The ceasefire holds, barely, provisionally, under strain. And somewhere in the mountains of western Iran, the air defense crews who fired a shoulder-fired missile at the most advanced rescue operation in American military history are telling that story to whoever will listen. They are telling it as a victory, and in the terms of the war they were fighting, the war of survival, the war of cost imposition, the war of making the superpower bleed, they are not wrong. This has been tonight's documentary.